So every once in a while, you get a hold of me. I don't get a hold of you. You actually get a hold of me. And we have conversations on the phone about the plans for the week, trying to figure out how we're going to get the movies to line up. And then a lot of times you get a hold of me with, I've got a new Versus idea. And given the fact of what came out this week, it made sense for this to actually line up with this week. You hate themes, obviously. I know that. Even though we're doing the scary theme for September, or for October. But I mean, still.
Man.
Yeah, of course.
Is it the one thing that always remains?
Yeah, the scary theme is always October now. Oscar theme is harder to do because we've done almost everything now.
Yeah.
Or we've had done it not Oscar months.
Usually Oscar theme now is just doing one on that Sunday.
Right. Which will happen again next year, but still.
This would have been a good one for that. Too.
Yeah, it totally would have been. So, basically, we're going to go completely in the other direction of what we did last week. This one is going into epic territory. Literally and figuratively, because...
I've already forgotten what last week was.
It was once in the Commitments, yeah, exactly. Completely different territory. And we're going to find out an epic battle for a change here. And we're going to see what happens when Ben Hur takes on Spartacus. Take it away.
Well, yeah. Actually, obviously, after Ben Hur, Charlton Heston did these, like, in his sleep.
Oh, yeah.
So, one, like, the Ten Commandments probably would have been a good one in place of Spartacus.
I'm kind of surprised we haven't done that one yet.
But then there was the thing where, I gotta be totally honest with you, I just don't care for the Ten Commandments.
That's right. We had a chance to watch it theatrically.
We could have seen it in theaters.
Yep.
Which we absolutely probably should have.
Mm-hmm.
But to be totally honest, after I saw the Ten Commandments for the first time, my only thought was, I'm pretty sure I could never watch that again. That is way too much effort for not much payoff at all. So, I decided to go with Spartacus because, honestly, I like to think that I can differentiate movies pretty well.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, I often kind of confuse people as to how I can even tell the difference between some movies. Occasionally,
mm-hmm.
I can't tell these two apart. Every now and then. And not to mention, they star two completely different actors, too. So, it's,
right.
You'd think that'd be easier to distinguish, but it's sometimes not really. But maybe once I, do a full-on discussion about both of them, maybe I'll be able to do that. So, I took this opportunity, since the new one was out, to go ahead and talk about whatever I didn't talk about with this one in the review for the new movie. Because as I said in that one, the new one makes 4 renditions of this I've seen. I know there's more, but I have seen at least 4 renditions of Ben Hur. There's the 1925 silent movie. There's this one. There's the animated version, and then there's the new one. The animated version I saw, like I said, I don't know how many animated versions there are, but it actually has Charlton Heston's voice in it. It actually starts off with a live-action portion of him, like, sitting in front of a damn fire with a book going... Ben Hur was written by, General what's-his-name in 18 whatever, and this is the story of, Jesus Christ and all that stuff. And then he proceeds to tell us the story and narrate it to us as an animated version plays out. And even though he's, like, old Charlton Heston by this point, he still does the voice of Ben Hur. It's like, I understand how that probably sounded cool, but looking at really young, noble Ben Hur, you can tell that it's old Charlton Heston's voice, and it's just weird. And like I said, that one was really, really Jesus focused, much more so than the other renditions we've seen, regardless of how much the Jesus storyline plays into the actual story. But we're gonna break away from Jesus just for a second to talk about something else. As I mentioned a few times before, Hugh Griffith won an Oscar for this movie. For a supporting actor. For his very small role that probably would not fly by any means today. Because it's the whole... He plays, like... Yeah. He's not playing his own race. We'll say that. A fully painted face included. But regardless of that, a lot of people thought that any supporting actor love should have gone to... Stephen Boy, the actor that plays Masala, our villain of sorts. And the thing about well, first off, the thing that makes the movie really work for starters in regards to his performance, along with Heston's, is really everything from the movie. The next 3.5 hours or more branches off how their friendship is portrayed in the first few scenes. The first few scenes being like the first 40 minutes. Because the way their friendship breaks apart after being so strong in its early stages is basically what the whole story hinges on. Because it's all about one friend kind of turns on another after giving him an ultimatum, and then it basically becomes a story of vengeance from then on, just with a lot of other elements to it. And yeah, so yes, they have to be absolutely believable friends in order for the whole rest of the story, for them to become enemies, to be believable, and they really, really pull that off. And the friend aspect makes the enemy aspect even more powerful because of that. But another thing you will notice about these two is that they're like, obviously their friendship is this really big bond that we learn, and we can just tell from watching them. However, this movie's famous for something else, and that is the fact of the gay undertones, which typically, I mean, I can kind of get it, but I personally feel like for the most part, 9 times out of 10, when a movie is accused of having gay undertones, it's kind of people really, really pushing it. Like they just kind of want that controversy,
right?
And it really doesn't necessarily add anything, and there's really no thing to it. It's just like, for some reason, everybody wants every movie character to be gay or something secret or closeted or something. But in this particular case, research will tell you that it was kind of intentional. Because obviously, for whatever reason, I guess that's just what the director wanted, I guess. But the way apparently it went was, obviously Heston's the big, manly macho dude or whatever. And that's the way he kind of played everything, and that's the way he actually was. And if you tried to basically put this to Heston, that this is the way the characters were, you're probably going to immediately get shut down. He may even attempt to beat the shit out of you. It is the 50s. So, what they basically did was, behind Heston's back, they went to Stephen Boyd and they said, we're not going to tell Heston this, but basically play the part as if you're in love with him, secretly. so that's how he played it, and that's how it they just kind of snuck that in there without Heston even knowing. And it's very, very subtle. There's nothing too over the top about it. We'll get a little more into that in Spartacus, but you kind of have to look for it, but it was intentionally put in there in cases. For a while there, I was just I think people are just kind of forcing it, and people just like to think that for whatever reason, because it seems like it's put in every other movie anymore. But it was actually intentional, so there's that. Now that is covered, we can move on. Obviously, it's worth noting, the main thing that this movie is known for is being one of the ultimate grand scale movies. Even now. Because, like I said, you think about the statistics of it now, where it was, it actually says on the back here, it's 100,000 costumes, 8,000 extras, and 300 sets. Even by today's standards, that's a shitload.
Oh, yeah.
And we're in a time period now where we get real lazy about that stuff. Like you saw, there were a number of CGI things in the new movie, like the horse in the stands.
Yeah.
All that stuff. But obviously they could not do that in 1959, so all this shit, everything you see, had to be built and made and all that other stuff. And it had to be brought together to make it look just right. And to think that this was accomplished in 1959, I mean, there have been really, really big movies forever, like Intolerance was in 1916, and that movie's gigantic. But still, even in 1959, it was still a really, really big damn deal. And the fact that everything that got accomplished with this movie, because Wyler is the director. Wyler has he may or may not have the most Best Director nominations more than any other director, if I had to guess. And he's always he would do some smaller things, but he was also known for these really really massive things too, like this for instance. And it just kind of gets bigger and bigger as it goes too. Like I was talking about the rowing scene. And the thing about it is, you would think that the attack and the ship and all that would be the big epic scene, but really what really makes this scene epic isn't the action scene itself, but the scene that takes place before it, which is just everybody rowing. But the thing about it is, there's the dude in the middle that's just drumming that gets more intense as it goes. There's the score itself in the background. There's the editing. And all this stuff is just kind of increasing. Like, all these things are here, the drumming and the score and the editing and all that. And the intensity of which they're doing it. And as this scene, like, you just think, okay, it's dudes rowing. But then, as all these things are happening, they're increasing as the scene goes. And the editing gets faster, the drumming gets faster, the score is getting louder. And the whole thing, it just builds and builds, pretty much like the movie does. And then we get to this point, obviously, after this point, when he decides that he's going to be one of the chariot people. A charioteer, I think they're called. Which, obviously. And that's where the Hugh Griffith character comes in. It's certainly an attention-grabbing performance, but the Oscar win has always kind of been lost on me a little bit. I'm not really sure how he pulled that off. But it's still, he still has a lot of memorable scenes. His introduction alone, when we see him watching, just them kind of running the chariot, and then something goes wrong, and this dude, he's kind of like a small dude, and he's not really that, intimidating or, I mean, he makes an impression, but it still catches you immediately by surprise when he runs up and he leaps onto this moving chariot and kicks the dude off and starts to drive it himself. And it's like, in that one moment, he kind of makes all the impression that he needs. Like, he didn't even have to act anymore. Like, this character is memorable from now on, just because of that moment. And then, obviously, he's kind of there for the remainder of this chariot portion of the movie. And while we're on the subject of the Oscars, obviously, there is a three-way tie for the movies that have won the most Oscars in history, with 11 wins, and that is this, Titanic, and Return of the King. And much like Titanic, I believe it was... Well, no, I think Titanic had more, but this one had 12 nominations and only lost one of them. And of course, like most big spectacle movies, Lord of the Rings, beat this curse, obviously, but it's the really, really big spectacle movie. So of all the nominations it got, weirdly enough, what do you think is the one that it lost? Screenplay.
Oh, that makes sense.
But the thing about it is, the movie is so monumental and so massive, and just instantly people knew how much this movie was going to stand the test of time. It almost seemed unfair. Like, it's one of those cases where you look at its competition and you're like, well, that's just really not fair. Because the other nominees, I think, were... my personal favorite of them... I think Ben Hur is a huge, huge accomplishment, but as far as the movie... it just kind of hits me more, I think. The Diary of Anne Frank was this year. And was probably its biggest competition. That's hard to say, because it's like, you're here, your biggest competition's like probably down here. And there was like The Nun Story and Anatomy of a Murder, and I think Room at the Top was the other one. Movies that are kind of big on their own scale, especially, they all have long run times too. But when compared to Ben Hur, they just shrink in comparison. Like, there was no way Ben Hur was not going to be the success that it was. Like I was saying, though, yeah, you can make it today and it'll fail miserably. but there's still, it's not just the time either. A lot of things came together to make this movie what it is. Because you can still, I know, there's a belief now that you can't make movies like Ben Hur anymore, like ever. Like Lord of the Rings was probably the last we'll ever see of the monumental epics, is what some people believe, that are going to be like really truly successful. I don't know. I guess we'll have to see, but it's certainly rare when they come along, and this definitely is one of the pinnacles where when you look back on the giant monumental epics that have been great successes, this is kind of right at the top of that, and the one that you look at immediately. And obviously, another one of those reasons is because of the chariot race, which is just probably one of the most famous scenes in movie history. Obviously, there's even that scene in Any Given Sunday when they're in Charlton Heston's house and he's like talking to them, and while Charlton Heston is talking, in the background on his TV is the fucking chariot race from Ben Hur, and while Charlton Heston is talking, we're cutting back and forth to the chariot race, and then, fuck you, Oliver Stone. Wow, we get it, dude. He was in that movie. But no, this chariot race is epic to the point that you can remake the movie in 2016, and somehow the chariot race falls short of when it was created in 1959. Which apparently it was $1 million of the budget alone went into the chariot race. Once again, that's $1 million in 1959 money. That's huge. And yes, it's like no matter how many times you see the movie, it's always exciting, and it's always, there's things that still always catch you by surprise, like the dude getting run over. The scene when Heston is on it, and then he has to like ramp, and he almost flies into his own horses and just barely catches himself. It's weird how thrilling it still is, regardless of what had to go to it at the time. And of course, I think the Masala having the blades on his tires that fuck up the other ones, I think has been parodied to no end by this point, and referenced and all that. And yeah, and it goes for like a straight 3.5 hours, depending on which. If you watch the whole thing with like the intermission and the overture and that stuff, we're going on 4 hours. But weirdly, in this time frame, there's rarely a dull spot. Like there's rarely a lull. Like, they're in there, for sure. But you'd be surprised how rare they are in the whole runtime. And even with, like making Masala a villain, like I was complaining about with the new movie, he's definitely a big villain, but they don't make him overly villain. Like, the most villainy he gets is as he's dying, after the chariot race. And one of the last things, like he's saying, where's my family and stuff like that, and his dying words are, you'll find them in the leper colony if you can recognize them. And then that it's like, that's his villain. It's pretty villainy, but that's as villainy as he gets, really. He doesn't play it too over the top, and I think that's why, in these past years, Boyd's performance has gotten so much attention. Because he's got like one of the most showy roles in it, but he rarely does anything really, really, really showy with it. He just makes it mostly believable. And I think that's really something that really helps kind of the whole movie in the long run, because that's such a huge portion of what the movie is. And so yes, the movie just keeps getting bigger and bigger as it goes. We have all these big sets and all these extras and all these costumes, and then we have stuff like the rowing scene, and then the boats attacking each other, and then the chariot race. And just when you think the movie cannot get any bigger, yep, he meets Jesus and the movie ends with the crucifixion. It's like, just when you don't think it can get epic enough, we go that far. And the thing is it's not just even in there either. It ties into the story entirely. Because the last thing Jesus does before he dies on the crucifix is heal Ben Hur's family. and it basically causes him to stop taking the vengeful route and just kind of everything is kind of, safe now, in this safe zone now, after, Jesus died for everything that he died for, and everything's kind of set back into the motion that it was all in before all of this. And it's, once again, even for the time period, the crucifixion is really brutally portrayed. Like, we don't really... And then there's the rain, and then, like, the blood mixing with it and rolling down. It's all very... Yeah, it's probably one of the better, more... it's weird to say something in Ben Hur is underrated, but it's kind of surprising when you hear about portrayals of the crucifixion and how well it's done in a lot of movies. I don't really hear Ben Hur brought up a lot, but, yeah, it's kind of like one of the quintessential ones, I think. So yes, obviously it's like one of the first movies you immediately think of when the word epic comes up. And it really just kind of basically made the genre what it is, really. Because it kind of seems like whenever you see a movie of this genre now, all you can think is, well, obviously it's trying to be Ben Hur. It's just a matter of how short it's going to fall. There's no reaching Ben Hur. The only question is, how close are you gonna get? And most of the time, you probably shouldn't have bothered. And there's a reason for that. So, didn't even mention the fact that Heston won Best Actor as well. Yeah, I think it's mostly... Yeah, I think it's mainly just the charisma he puts forth in it, and how, like I said, typically in these movies, it seems like making the characters believable kind of takes a back seat to the spectacle. But this movie is very much concerned about the characters, too, and making sure they're portrayed believably, and, the performances are at the same level as everything else in the movie. So yes, it's no mystery that this movie did win 2 acting Oscars, even though they may have gone to different people depending on who you ask. So yes, that's basically what Ben Hur is. And it's even, touching back on it now and going through all this stuff just makes it even more embarrassing that they even tried to do another one. I said, I know they're probably going to be, I'm sure they're not done remaking Ben Hur because there's so many versions of it as it is. And really, yeah, it does get brought up a lot about, people like to say this is the quintessential one, but to not forget that this one's a remake as well. But there's really, apart from the spectacle aspect, there's really not a lot to remember about the 1925 movie. I just vaguely remember. I've seen the whole thing, and it's only like maybe a few minutes past 2 hours. But I just really don't remember a whole lot about it. It's really... because this one is just so overpowering. It's just... Yeah, you can try if you want. There's no law against it, but it just kind of seems like there's no point trying to reach this level of of movie making in general. So I say that, though, and the very next year, in 1960, Kubrick made Spartacus. The very next year. Well, I say Kubrick made Spartacus, but really, it seemed like the biggest driving force behind this movie was Kirk Douglas himself. Because it started off with, Trumbo. Because Dalton Trumbo wrote it, and of course this is portrayed in the movie. When Kirk Douglas, I don't know if, it's hard to tell what in the movie Trumbo was totally accurate. But pretty much the gist of it is there, where Kirk Douglas himself approached Trumbo and said, hey, we're going to put this movie together. It's going to be massive. It's going to be huge. We're in the wake of Ben Hur. And you need to write it. And this was a massive deal because it was going to be, I think, the first time since the whole Blacklist thing where Trumbo's name was going to be put on a movie again, not under his pseudonym. Like, his actual name was going to be on it in the credits, and it is. And that was a massive, massive deal at the time, after everything he'd gone through and all that shit. Actually seeing a screenplay by Dalton Trumbo on the screen was, like, yeah. Like to the point that people probably thought they were never going to see that again, especially him. So there was that in itself, and then there was the idea that Anthony Mann was actually the director on this. To the point, I think actually some of the stuff, like some of the desert shots or something that he did, are actually still in there. And Anthony Mann is this fantastic. He's like one of the best Western directors there ever was. He did like Winchester 73 and The Man from Laramie. A lot of the Jimmy Stewart ones that are just completely like any Western out there with Anthony Mann's name on it, you need to see. I think he did Man of the West too, which is a really big one. I think Gary Cooper was that one. Any Western with Anthony Mann's name on it is great or beyond that. And at some point, for a reason I don't know, Kirk Douglas fired him and then brought on Kubrick after they did Paths of Glory together. I think this, yeah, I'm pretty sure this is after Paths of Glory by like a few years. So this is basically one of those big kind of, I mean, I'm sure it happened, you know, all through the 40s and beyond, but this seems like one of the first times, as far as thinking back, where it was really, really, really publicized that the star of the movie was so in charge of the making of it. Because pretty much every major decision that went into this movie seemed to have been made by Kirk Douglas himself. So, and so yes, obviously we start off and it's the slaves. Honestly, I'm sure there will be disagreements, but I like Spartacus fine, like the whole way. Like it has more dry spots than Ben Hur does. Which is weird since it's like half an hour shorter. I don't know what that says, but I don't know if it's the greatness of Ben Hur or the Spartacus falling a little short. But honestly, I think my favorite part of Spartacus in the entire 3 hours and 15 minutes is the first hour. When he's kind of in that slave world under Peter Usanov's command, who also won Best Supporting Actor. So there's that. We'll actually get more into that later, because this movie, you can kind of see it here, but Spartacus has a massive cast list. Like, oh my god. Like, every time I watch it, I forget just how many incredible actors are in this, in major parts, too. But yeah, I always really like this portion where it starts off with him as the slave that's eventually so... he's basically so against the system that he's eventually given the Peter Ustinov and has to become a gladiator. And there is there's a lot of a lot of the real big intensity comes in the first hour with these scenes. One of my personal favorite scenes is when they're being basically put out there in twos to fight to the death to entertain Laurence Olivier. And the way they decide to do it is it's Spartacus and all the other dudes just kind of waiting while the other people go out there. And we could be, you know, adding to the big spectacle that the movie already is with the vast landscapes, like I said, all the costume design and the production design, all that stuff that goes into it. So we could be focusing on these gladiator matches. But for this first one, we're just kind of in this enclosed space with Spartacus and the others, and we just kind of hear it. And Spartacus is watching through, like, the crack in the door. So we kind of see it just in tiny little intervals, and only a little bit of it. But for the most part, we just hear it. And there's just that building dread that we know. They know that two of them are next to do this. And we know it's not till Spartacus is actually out there that we'll get the spectacle that is actually seeing a gladiator match in full. And it's at that point that we kind of realize that the movie's going to be probably a little more brutal than we're expecting. Obviously, once the rating system changed, this ended up with PG-13. Which, if you're a movie from the 1960s and you get a re-rating of PG-13, that means you're probably pretty hardcore. Like, PG-13 is nothing nowadays, but if you're a movie from the 60s that has PG-13, you're pushing it. Like, you're really pushing the envelope, surprisingly. And there's just that really brutal moment where, like, it's even more, like, emotion than it is what we actually see. But, I mean, it's brutal, too, what we see. But the way that the other gladiator spares Spartacus and decides to throw his trident up at where Olivier and all the others are instead. And he goes to climb up there to attack them, but he ends up getting speared by a guard. And Olivier standing there watching this, and the dude's just hanging there with a spear in his back. And you think he's just gonna, like, you know, either watch him die or just kind of push him off or, like, let him go or whatever. He does one better. He pulls a knife out and just stabs the dude in the back when he's already dying. So it's like, for 1960, that's pretty damn brutal. Especially being on screen. Because this was the same year as Psycho, when, like, it's the most horrifying stabbing in movie history, and we don't really see anything. But no, we straight up see Olivier stab this dude in the back, just right on screen. And it really catches you off guard with how we saw the fights from a distance, and then suddenly we're right up close to it in the very next scene. It's really quite jarring. And then there's also the whole thing, the brotherhood between the slaves is a really important aspect of this movie too. Where, like, he's kind of befriended that one slave, and they're just kind of hanging back, and they know they're being put in twos to fight to the death. And this basically new friend that he's made is looking at him, and he's just like, you know, what if they pair us together? Like, what's gonna happen? Like, are you gonna kill me, or am I gonna kill you? Or and it's really, it just really just has a whole sense of dread through the whole thing. Like I said, this is where we're introduced to Usman's character pretty well. And he's kind of really the main thing he does here that's really, like, it's another one of those ones where I'm kind of surprised in retrospect that it's an Oscar-winning performance. But when you think about it, the fact that he could be a scene stealer with a cast that has Laurence Olivier in a really, really meaty villain role, and then, like, Charles Lawton and Tony Curtis and all these other people, to be a scene stealer in this cast is a really big deal. So, I always like that line when he's, they're basically preparing for everything, and he's like, get me my second best wine. Oh, no, wait. Get the best wine, but just make the goblets really small. I always like just that little... That's basically all his performance is those little moments that really work. His scene with Lawton is really good, too. That might be my favorite scene with him, actually. When he's in the scenes with Lawton and Olivier later, are, I think, when he really starts to shine through. And so, yeah, I guess while we're on the topic, the supporting cast, as I just mentioned. Like I said, I just mentioned Laurence Olivier and Charles Lawton. There is, I think John Dahl from Rope is in there. And, obviously Tony Curtis is the one that Spartacus kind of takes on almost in, like, a fatherly way. Even, I'm not quite sure how far apart they were in age at the time, but that actually surprisingly works well between them. There is one scene that's often talked about, and that is the bath with Tony Curtis bathing Laurence Olivier. And it is very much... basically, it causes Tony Curtis to flee from him because he's basically... I guess he takes it as sexual harassment. Like I was talking about, that the gay undertones would come back. Only they're not so undertony in Spartacus. Well, the thing about it was the scene had originally been cut because of the dialogue. Because it's it's Tony Curtis, who's this young guy who kind of has, you know, that build, and he's bathing this older guy that has, like, you know, he's clearly bisexual, we learn. And he's saying things like, what do you prefer, oysters or slugs? And we get, there's really not a whole lot. Like I said, undertone may not be the best word. I think it's pretty damn clear what's going on here. But the thing about it is, because the scene was so lost because it was cut out of the original versions, was that it's very, when you, like, maybe if you don't know, it may not be so obvious, but if you do know, it is so obvious. Because the audio was pretty much lost, when they remastered this scene, Olivier's voice is redubbed by Anthony Hopkins. And like I said, it's kind of like, when you know that, it's like really obvious and kind of takes you out of it, because it's so clearly Anthony Hopkins' voice. But if you don't know that, then it might be... Well, if you're watching this and you didn't know, you know now. But if you initially saw that scene and didn't know that Hawkins had redubbed it, it would probably blend in well enough. So that's educational. And then there is, obviously, eventually we get to the romance. The romance is actually a huge portion of this movie, because it starts in that first portion, and then just kind of grows as the movie goes on. Verenia, I think her name is. Gene Simmons is the one that plays her. With a J. It's a female character, you Kiss fans. Don't worry about this. It gives you some weird imagery to think about, though. And the way this romance is played up, where it's like them like next to the lakes and they're in like the wilderness with the flowers and stuff. It's like you see this movie about a slave revolt and gladiators, and it's surprisingly brutal, and it has all these different undertones and overtones, maybe you'd say. There's politics in it. Like the whole Senate thing is a really big portion of the story. And then they just throw this romance into it. And it's almost like the romance out of like a 30s romance movie. Like when you're watching this scene between the two of them, you kind of start to forget what kind of movie you're watching to begin with. But, and then that kind of obviously ends up becoming more and more of a big deal as the movie goes on. And ultimately more or less ending on it. In a very tragic way, but still technically ending on it, I suppose. But obviously, we're kind of building, but like I said, it has a lot more dry spots than Ben Hur does. But the big moments are really, really big, especially just coming from the cast themselves. Like if this movie had much less recognizable names in it than Laurence Olivier or Charles Lawton, it'd probably be a lot less interesting of a movie. Like even if the performances, were up to par. People like Olivier and Lawton can bring stuff to a movie that would not be there without them. And I really think that's what really keeps this movie alive. Because the thing about it, weirdly, is Kubrick's name being on it. Because obviously Kubrick has obviously as he went, he started to have a very, very distinct style, to where you could totally and completely recognize a Kubrick movie when you saw it. And there's even a distinct style to Paths of Glory. But when you watch this, you don't really get a particular style. It kind of just has the feel of, a post-Ben Hur epic movie. It's kind of weird to watch a movie with Kubrick's name on it that doesn't really have a particular signature on it. That may just be because because Kirk Douglas was so in control of it. I don't know if that had a lot to do with it or what, but, and Kubrick, I think, was only like 31 when he made this, so he may have still been, I don't know, but I feel like it could have been more, I don't think artsy is the word I don't know what exactly word I'm looking for, but it could have been more, yeah, it could have been more of a director's movie, I think. But weirdly, it's not. It's definitely much more of a spectacle and, weirdly, an acting base for most of them. And of course, obviously, but you do have those really big moments, like when Spartacus and Olivier are talking to their armies, and we're kind of cutting back and forth just before the big ultimate battle scene. And the thing, though, that this movie does differently than you see in a lot of movies like this, or movies that would rip it off later, is that the big he has the big speech to the armies and all that, because his army's been getting progressively bigger as it goes, as they've been getting closer and closer to where this battle is going to take place and who they're fighting. You kind of think it's going to be one army versus another. There will be carnage, there will be bloodshed, there'll probably be lives lost that we don't want to lose. But ultimately, our hero will come out victorious, yeah? Well, problem is that there's a whole other army that they weren't counting on, and they get cornered, and most of Spartacus's army is laid completely and totally to waste. They just get fucking annihilated. And Olivier basically comes out on top of this. But that brings us to... there's a lot of famous scenes in this movie. There's even a lot of famous scenes in Ben Hur. But if we're talking about maybe the most famous scene of all these combined, yeah, surely even you know this one. It's the moment when what remains of Spartacus's army is here, and they're like, "All right, which one of you is it? Which one of you is the leader?"
Yeah.
And of course,
Spartacus.
And it's just it's regardless of how many times it's been parodied and referenced and all that stuff, it still hits in just the right way, and
Right.
it's really nice when it comes. It's a really good moment. But good moments can only last so long in a movie so bleak. Yes, this movie does end with Spartacus' crucifixion. Yes, but however, I do say that, and yes, that was considered extremely ballsy at the time, where you have your big ending and your big hero, your big war hero, and the movie ends with the villain basically coming out on top and the hero being crucified. But the last scene of the movie, after his baby's been born, and she shows up and she's there and basically shows him that his child is free and not a slave in the final moments of his life. He knows this, that his child will be free unlike he was, and it'll be because of everything that went down. And it's a really emotional moment, and the weird thing about that is when you look at Kubrick's filmography. Now, mind you, I think we all love Kubrick.
Yeah.
If we don't, I mean, you know, there's tastes and opinions and all that, sure, but I mean, I would like to think for the most part we all love Kubrick and know that what he's capable of. And the thing about it, especially what he would show later, much later in his career, but what you'll notice when you look at all of those, even though he was probably one of, if not the best at what he did, if there's one thing that's almost always missing from Kubrick's movies, it's an emotional aspect. Like, his movies, absolutely brilliant and flawless as they are, there's not a whole lot of... They're very, very cold. Like, there's no sentimentality or anything like that at all. They're very, very dark and, you know, just kind of devoid of a real emotional heart kind of thing. So when you look at his overall filmography, this moment really, really stands out. And this was like what would be a really rare occurrence for Kubrick, to have a moment like this. To have the movie, while ending very bleakly, ends on a really, really emotional moment. And it's just, the fact that was so rare to come from him, I think really adds to the impact of it. So it makes it very interesting to look at it that way. So yes, like I said, Spartacus has really, really high moments when they get there. But there's also, it does not need to be 3 hours and 15 minutes. That's for sure. And that Ben Hur can have about 20 to 30 extra minutes that Spartacus doesn't have, and rarely have a dull moment, and just kind of be the poster child for epic. I'm always going to choose Ben Hur, but Spartacus definitely has people that will see it as kind of the ultimate spectacle movie as well, so I guess it just depends on where you're coming from, but I think Ben Hur is kind of widely regarded as that the epic movie.
Right.
So, yes.
So ends another edition of Versus. Next week, I could give you a cryptic comment, but I'm just going to cryptically say I really can't talk about it.
We can't talk about it.
No, we're not allowed to talk about it. I may not even be allowed to talk about it next week. You never know.
Also, we're not allowed to talk about it.
We're really not allowed to talk about it. And if we are to talk about it, then we only can tell you that we're not allowed to talk about it. So, continue to watch Versus as we roll into the month of September. And yeah, I'm very excited. Soon you'll be doing like marathon filming sessions. Yep. Next week is Don't Breathe. We waited forever for this movie. It's finally coming out.
Wouldn't say forever.
Well, horror fans have been waiting for this movie for a long time, ever since we first saw the concept for it. And The Mechanic Resurrection is coming out as well. So.
Oh yeah, that too.
And Hands of Stone, supposed to be wide. We'll see. So that's what's coming up next week. As it pertains to this week, we've had a lot of wrestling content here on Papa's Wrestling Weekend. We covered Raw, Wednesday show, Ring of Honor, Death Before Dishonor. We did NXT TakeOver last night. We're doing SummerSlam tonight, Raw tomorrow, Wednesday show back on Wednesday. So a lot of wrestling content, if that's your bag. Horror Nights content coming very soon as well, and a lot of great stuff coming. So stay tuned here to the Podcast Network. Follow us along on Twitter at Podcast Network, and our merchandise store is Zazzle.com /Popcast Network. It's easy for you to say, isn't it? And Facebook fan page Podcast Network. So in the meantime, I want to thank you guys and girls out there for watching. Hey, Janie, parting words?
That's it.